What's up guys, TCG here, and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today guys, I'm going to be ranking every single Pokemon gimmick in the trading card game that we've had since the Black and White era. I'm not going to be mentioning anything before Black and White because I didn't play the game during that time, I didn't really understand how it worked, and I didn't really want to give a ranking for something that I don't know a lot about. So we're going to be sticking with every single, like, quote-unquote modern era gimmick today, and we have a lot, and it's been kind of astonishing to see how many different gimmicks that Creatures has come up with over time. Some really good, some really bad, and some that are just really in that middle area. So I'm going to break down each one of these, kind of give a little rundown of each one, and I'll try and give them the most fair ranking possible based on like a design standpoint when it comes to like competitive viability. Was it healthy for like the metagame, and also was it like accurate to like its in-game counterpart in the video games if it has an in-game counterpart. Before we get started, I would quickly ask to see if you're subscribed. I put a ton of effort into planning and making these videos, which can get tough sometimes due to me being a college student. Subscribing helps support me and my channel, and it allows me to make more videos like the ones you're currently watching. And if you want to help support my channel even further, consider becoming a member. With 3 different tiers to choose from, you'll get access to my videos early, get exclusive behind the scenes updates, you'll get creative inputs on new videos, and more. Every member will also be featured in the credits of every single one of my videos. Thank you so much for your support so far. Now let's get back to the video. So we're going to start with the OG capital Pokemon EX. These aren't the actual OGs, those were the lowercase EX from earlier, but we're sticking with the quote-unquote OG of the modern era. Capital EX ran from original Black and White, I think it was the second expansion of Black and White, Boundaries Crossed, and ran all the way until the end of X and Y in Steam Siege. And it's a really mixed bag. Obviously, it's the longest running gimmick out of all of these, and so it's bound to have some really good cards and some really bad cards. And the first example that I want to give as like a bad one is Mewtwo EX. I'm currently working on in the background basically a power creep project. I hope to get that out eventually, but it's taking a long time. But I had an entire like segment of that video talking about Mewtwo EX and the Mewtwo Wars. If you're a longer time player, you definitely remember the Mewtwo Wars, and they were really bad. Like, I didn't play during that time, but I've done like a lot of research, and oh my gosh, the number of Mewtwo EX at the beginning was just not a good start for EX. But as time went on, they definitely did get like a lot better in regards to like balancing. Of course, you had a few that were just completely unbalanced and ruined a lot of like the aspects of the game, just made it very difficult for any other kind of deck to succeed. Like, we got like Shaman EX that was like in every single deck, you just plow through your entire deck with Shaman. And then once we got into X and Y had more basically different ways to use Pokemon EX, and EX was kind of actually pretty well balanced for the most part. It was a really good step forward for making these Pokemon, which are all basic Pokemon, even if they're evolutions, give them a good fighting chance with just making them basics and balancing out the 2 prize mechanic, which was only seen in like Pokemon Legend before. It just made it really balanced in my opinion. So I'm gonna put OG EX in very good, because it was, I wouldn't say it was like just fine. I think that OG EX had so much room of like really good and really bad to where it just kind of, for me, it mediates out to very good. And that's just because I feel like there was more good than bad, and there was like the proper steps taken to actually properly balance most of the EX cards in retrospect. And that does mean that a lot of them are overpowered, like Charizard cards. You had like Rayquaza, Mega Rayquaza. We'll get back to Megas in a little bit. But for the most part, I just think that it was a pretty well-balanced mechanic that stayed pretty consistent throughout its time in the TCG. And so I'm going to put it in very good because it did have a good long-lasting impact. Next up, we have Team Plasma's Pokemon. Now, we do have a kind of modern version of Team Plasma's Pokemon and like the Plasma mechanic coming out in the near future with Team Rocket's Pokemon. We'll get back to them in a little bit. But Team Plasma's Pokemon were pretty good. Like, I don't think that they really succeeded as much as people might have hoped, just because the rest of the meta was kind of, like, really strong against, like, just already really strong. It was, like, trying to cram in Team Plasma Pokemon, but Team Plasma's stuff had a lot of synergy. You had, I'm not really, like, very well educated on Team Plasma stuff, but from what I can remember, there was a lot of really good Team Plasma cards that all had good synergy with each other, and I think, honestly, it was just a really good way to, incorporate what Team Plasma was. It was introduced in Plasma Freeze, I believe, and it continued on, and there were some pretty memorable cards, even if they weren't competitively viable. I do remember that a lot of Team Plasma cards were just really, like, really cool to look back at in retrospect, partially because the Team Plasma logo is just so cool, in my opinion, especially, like, it's just, seeing the background of all the cards was really cool to see, and even though they didn't really have that much of, like, a competitive scene, or a competitive worth, they still were pretty good in my opinion. I'll put them in just fine, because I don't really remember them other than they were just like a really cool kind of gimmick that, no pun intended, Plasma Freeze. They just were kind of neat in my opinion, and I like that. Okay, next up, I know it's hard to see, I'm sorry about that, we have Megas. Megas were introduced in X and Y in correlation with X and Y's main gimmick of Mega Evolution. Now, Megas were only given to Pokemon EX because the game's designers didn't want to make, like, a Stage 4 Pokemon, essentially, and they literally broke that rule down the line, and now they're not doing that rule going forward. It's really stupid. We'll get back to both of those in a little bit, but for now, Megas only could evolve from Basic EX, and only from Pokemon that could Mega Evolve. And this kind of, like, made the pool really small. I also included Primals in this list, in Mega, because there technically were Megas as well. So Megas didn't really have a lot of chances to branch out. It was a lot of just the same cards that were sometimes even reprinted multiple times, like Mega Gardevoir had multiple different versions of itself. And in that aspect, it's a little, like, meh. Like, I look back at Megas, and a lot of them were just severely underpowered. But they were, in my opinion, they were very well balanced, because in order to Mega Evolve, you had to treat it like a regular evolution stage, and in order to do that, you had to evolve and end your turn when you evolved, unless you attached a Spirit Link tool card in order to keep it in play, and, like, not end your turn. And they also didn't have very much, like, higher of an HP compared to their base EX forms. And also, at the same time, they gave up only 2 prizes. There were no 3-prize Pokemon at the time, and Mega stayed as 2 prizers, which I think just made the game pretty healthy for the most part. There were certain decks, like Mega Rayquaza with Skyfield, that was just, like, way too overpowered for its time. But for the most part, I think Megas are pretty memorable, as they had probably one of the most memorable moments when, Mega Audino won the World Championships out of nowhere, and I just feel like Megas were a pretty well-implemented way to get them in the game. I'm not going to put them in very good, because there was a lot of missed opportunity with them, especially on the competitive side of things, with only certain Pokemon getting favoritism, and other Megas, like Mega Swampert. I'm very, very stingy about that, and, like, what's the word I'm thinking of? I'm just not happy that Mega Swampert didn't get a good Mega. Both Swampert EX and Mega Swampert were really not awesome. So I'm just going to put Megas in just fine, because they were good, and they were well designed, but they were also kind of the same as Plasma Pokemon. They just kind of missed the mark a little bit on making them kind of what they could have fully been, and kind of favoritizing a few specific ones. Okay, next up we have these 2 symbols, which are actually just going to be representing the Ancient Trait Pokemon. Ancient Traits were basically like an extra an extra ability, in a sense. They were like an extra way to buff up a specific Pokemon. Like, you had like Bidoof, which had, like, if it gets healed, you get to heal it twice on a 60 HP Pokemon, which really didn't do much. But you had some Pokemon that could attack twice. You had some that could take extra prize cards when you knocked out your opponent's Pokemon. And for the most part, I think that it was a pretty well-designed mechanic. Unfortunately, it didn't last very long. It was really cool to see, like, the full art design that each one of them had. And they were implemented on Team Magma and Aqua Pokemon, which we'll get to in a minute, and also, like, the Primal Pokemon. But they didn't really, I just feel like they were released a little too late to have much of an impact, and they were kind of, like, shoved to the side once we got Pokemon Break. So I think I'll also put these guys in just fine, probably above Team Plasma, because they did have competitive viability and still see competitive viability in, like, GLC, which was obviously not the intention, but they are still technically around, and I liked them enough because they gave us, like, really cool effects, just really interesting interactions, and they also had that, like, really cool sort of, like, half art, half card, where it kind of, like, the art fused into part of the card. It just felt like a more special card to have in your deck, and that just a really cool gimmick, in my opinion. Alright, Team Magma and Team Aqua's Pokemon. Now, I'm just gonna be honest, these guys are not very good. Like, both of these came out during the, I think it was Primal Clash, when they came out the second time around, because there was Magma and Aqua's Pokemon previously in, I believe it was like the Diamond and Pearl era, and those were kind of just forgotten. Unless I'm thinking of the original, like, I'm probably thinking of, sorry, I'm thinking of Gen 3. They are from Gen 3, so they're probably from an earlier era, but we have, like, some of the most memorable cards, like Team Magma's Groudon, and, like, Team Aqua's Kyogre, and when they were implemented into the trading card game, they just kind of missed the mark. I think they were just nerfed a little too much by, they had synergy, but their synergy was kind of weird, and ironically, they just kind of ended up being used more outside of what they were intended to be used for. Like, some of the cards were just used in other decks. Like, Team Magma's Secret Lair was used outside of the original idea. I think it was used in just other decks. I think Vespiquen was one of them. I don't remember if that's even the right Pokemon. I don't think so. But there were certain decks that used Team Magma and Team Aqua Pokemon cards, but they didn't actually just work well as a gimmick. They just had too much of a limitation, and their synergy wasn't enough to kind of redeem them. They did kind of get a spiritual successor later on down the line with Single and Rapid Strike, but once again, we'll get back to them later. So I'm not going to put them in, I'll put them in not good because they're not really that well implemented. Okay, Pokemon Break. Pokemon Break were essentially introduced as an extra form of evolution for any Pokemon. They weren't limited to just Pokemon that could Mega Evolve, but were instead given to everyone. And, they were, I think that they were not that great, in my opinion. Like, when you look back at Break, you can't really remember very many good breaks. You had, like, Trevenant Break, but Trevenant Break was only good because it had an attack that basically let you sit up in the active spot and item lock while you used an annoying attack. That was its only purpose ever, and that's a little bit disappointing. And then you had, like, Greninja Break, which is so super broken. I don't know what they were thinking when they made Greninja Break, especially in a format where, like, Night March was a thing with tiny little Pokemon. But Greninja Break was just like, oh yeah, here's an extra ability. It just felt like, here is one extra little gimmick in exchange for evolving one more time, essentially giving it a stage 3 Pokemon, meaning that you have to evolve that Pokemon 3 times in order to get the break, and most of the time, for most cards, it just wasn't worth it. And I just don't think that was implemented in a way that it's worth using most of the Pokemon Break. Nowadays, you still have some Pokemon Break that were, like, pretty decent in retrospect, but you don't really see enough of that. And I just don't think that I'm a huge fan of the break mechanic. It always just kind of felt annoying to get a break when I was opening the sets. I was like, oh man, a break. Like, this is cool, but like, I don't ever think I'm going to use this, and I'd rather have like an EX or Mega or something like that, if that makes any sense at all. So I'm going to put breaks in not good, but they're at least better and more competitively viable than Team Magma and Team Aqua. All right. Pokemon GX, the OG Pokemon GX that came out during the Sun and Moon, Guardians Rising era, and went all the way into the end of the Sun and Moon block. I've got to say, right now, GX was the best. This was around the time that I started playing. I actually started competitively playing with tag teams, which we'll get to. But I did start kind of understanding more about how to play the game with, like, properly. If you've seen my 3,000 subscriber special, it's on my community tab if you want to hear me say more about this. I didn't really understand how the game worked properly with energies and trainers and stuff, so I didn't really understand how to play the game until, like, GX started coming out, and I was like, wow, these are really cool. Like, they were pretty well balanced. There were some that weren't great, and some that were just too powerful. Same thing with EX. They mirror EXs very, very similarly, but I feel like they were done in a proper way, where like their GX attacks were really strong, but they weren't so strong to where it broke the game, unlike tag teams. But I just felt that they were like well balanced enough to be also to allow for decks like single price decks like Zapdos, Buzzwole to still be able to like work in the same format, and it just felt like a very healthy kind of card to keep in your decks. And also when they started kind of phasing out in favor of tag teams and stuff like that, they still just were there as sort of a more helpful supporting role, and they did their job well. So I think that GX was just a very well implemented mechanic into the TCG. Giving us the one-time use of GX attacks was a really cool idea, and I think it was most GX attacks from the base GXs were just implemented in a way that it felt balanced enough, but also powerful and worth your time trying to use a GX attack. So, yeah, that's my kind of little tangent on why I think that GX deserves to be in the top tier. Alright, Ultra Beasts. I'm signifying them through the red GX because they were introduced in Crimson Invasion with the red GX in mind. And I gotta say that Ultra Beasts are actually pretty good. I might put them above... yeah, I'm gonna actually put them above Ancient Traits, just because they all were consistent with each other. And look, I'm a sucker for the Ultra Beasts. I love the Ultra Beasts. They look really cool. They're very just like mysterious Pokemon, and their mechanic was that they all interacted with prize cards in one way or another. And I just felt like that was a very, very cool way to implement a different mechanic into the game, and how they all interacted with prize cards in very unique ways, which was really shocking because I wasn't expecting there to be that many different ways to interact with prize cards. Adding prize cards to your opponents, to their prize cards, or like being able to look at your prize cards, and if you find like an energy or something, then you do more damage. There was like just so many different ways to use it. Like if you have a specific amount of prize cards, you can do more damage. It just felt like a really cool way to implement something that hadn't really been seen before, except for a couple like niche Pokemon that really never saw use. And while they're just fine, and ultimately their overall gimmick was just kind of abused for the most powerful ones like Naganadel and Guzzlord just take 2 prize cards or things like that, were still good enough as a design standpoint, and consistently, just kind of as a consistent design standpoint, to where I like them a bit more than I like Ancient Traits, because Ancient Traits didn't last that long, and Ultra Beasts lasted a pretty long time, so I think I'm just going to put them in just fine. Alright, Shining Pokemon. I'm actually going to put them, I'll put them in not good. Shining Pokemon were introduced in were they introduced in Shining Fates? No, I think they were introduced in Hidden Fates, and they weren't very ever good. They were never competitively viable. They're beautiful cards to look at. They have a shiny Pokemon on them, and there are a couple that are actually good in the Gym Leader Challenge format, but they were never really that great. So I don't think that Shining Pokemon really... They kind of missed the mark on Shining Pokemon, and I don't really like how they turned out, because they just felt too expensive to use, or their gimmicks didn't feel worthy enough of ever putting them in a deck and trying to use them. There were some decks that tried to use Shining Pokemon, but most of the time they just weren't used it, because they were overshadowed and eclipsed by not Ultra Beasts, we already talked about them. I'm looking at Necrozma's symbol for Prism Stars. That's what I'm talking about. And Prism Stars, in my opinion, are probably one of my favorite gimmicks, if not my favorite gimmick, absolutely, in the modern trading card game. My favorite gimmick has to be a tie between either Prism Stars or like V-Union / Legend. But I love Prism Stars, because they basically just opened up the game in a new way to kind of introduce us to these like one-of cards that you can play in your deck. And they were very powerful, but they were balanced enough to where most of the time on their own, they just helped benefit something else in the battle, or they could hold on their own as like a small Pokemon. And once they were gone, you could never get them back. You couldn't recycle them and use them a million times, because they got sent to the Lost Zone. So, for Prism Stars, I'm putting them in the absolute best, because from a design standpoint, they just basically were able to use these really powerful effects that could change the game on its head in a very healthy way, in my opinion, until we got Tag Team GXs, and they basically started getting abused by tag teams and all that, which did dampen their sort of the community consensus on them and how they felt about it. But I still loved Prism Stars, and part of I have a little like toxic trait for being able to go Tapu Koko Prism Star and being able to use Thunder Mountain Prism Star in my Pikachu and Zekrom deck. But besides that, I think that Prism Stars were just very good, and not just for Pokemon, for trainers and energies as well. And they just had a very nice feel to them in a way that I don't think that we've really seen replicated since. And they were the most inclusive in letting every kind of card have a chance to be a Prism Star, and for some deck to be able to use them. And that's something that not everything on this list can say. And just personally, I love the design of Prism Star cards. The Prism Star design in the background is really cool. You also get to see like a more powerful version of that Pokemon. And also just like the black shiny border was really cool. Okay, Tag Team GX, get in the worst, please. Oh my gosh. When Tag Teams came out, I was like, that was when I started actually competitively playing the game. My first real competitive deck was Pikachu and Zekrom GX. And eventually I started playing Arceus, Dialga, and Palkia with the Bird Trio, actually. And it was like really bad looking back at it. But it did have some success, and I think that's because that every one of the tag teams are ridiculously overpowered. And obviously there were good tag teams, and there were some that were not as good, but all of them were just, why did they introduce 3-prize Pokemon? And why was it like, here is a giant 3-prize basic Pokemon that can wipe your opponent's entire board, or one-shot another tag team, or, oh, you can take one more prize card every time you knock out a Pokemon, take 4 prizes on another tag team. It's just disgusting. When I think back at tag teams, all I can think of is just how awful Arceus, Dialga, and Palkia, like, ruined the game for the longest time. And I made an entire other documentary on Arceus, Dialga, and Palkia GX, if you want to watch it afterwards, but long story short, Tag Team GX was a horribly designed kind of gimmick, and I never want to see that again. Please, never again. Okay, next up we have Pokemon V. I'm actually going to put Pokemon V in, I want to put Pokemon V in Just Fine. Probably towards I'm going to put them in the middle of Just Fine. Because, to be honest, I liked Pokemon V. From a design standpoint, like, visually, they looked way better than Pokemon EX, or, Pokemon EX, capital or lowercase. because they just allowed the card to exist in its own full art. And GX did this too in a very nice way, where it just gave us the full Pokemon to look at rather than restraining it to a tiny box. Now, I know that EXs on both EXs from the modern era can like have some fun with implementing the box into the design, but it really takes away from being able to see the rest of the card. And I feel like also Vs were okay. They weren't well balanced. They weren't well balanced with each other. Like, you had one really good one with like Zacian V, and then you had like Pinurkin V, which was just awful and like bottom of the barrel. You're never gonna see anyone playing this. And so there's a really big disparity between different Vs. It was obviously very favoritist towards certain fan favorites, but I think that they were still good enough in general, because they evolved into VMAXs, Vstar, and Vstars, to where they still could hold up on their own, even if they were just not going to evolve into a VMAX or Vstar. There were a lot of single, like, Pokemon Vs, like Raikou, or Tapu Koko, or different ones that just kind of felt balanced enough to where they felt worth playing as like a one-of in your deck or something. And also, they paved the way for you to evolve into VMAX and Vstar. VMAX, I'm putting you in the worst. I'm not putting you in as the absolute worst. That's gonna go to Tag Team GX. And if we're doing this based on like from best of each category to worst, Tag Team's always gonna take it. But I don't think VMAXs were well implemented. They continued the streak of 3-price Pokemon, and they just had higher HP. We went past the 300 HP mark, which we're still going higher. We're almost at 400 HP now, but they just felt really stale. Like, VMAXs just kind of felt boring in a sense, to where it was like, they all were very, very linear. They were all just very easy to predict, like, oh, this is the play line you're going for. Oh, you're going to one-shot my VMAX, 3 prize cards for you. Game's over in 4 turns. It just didn't feel very fun to play in a format with VMAXs. Now, some VMAXs had some really cool gimmicks, like Shadow Rider or Ice Rider VMAX, which even saw, like, decent amount of play almost the entire time, but you also had some more boring VMAXs that just never really took off, like Cinderace VMAX, both Cinderace VMAXs for that matter, but it just feels disappointing to me to see how VMAX was just not really well implemented, and just also how they weren't balanced with each other at all. You just had ones that were so good that there was no point in playing other VMAXs. And I don't really like when the trading card game does that. And it's always going to happen. But like VMAX, you're not going to give up an evolution line in your deck and a 3-prizer just for it to not be good. And also, it was just, I feel like that's just the general community consensus that just this is not a well-designed mechanic, and never was, and I don't want to see any more VMAX-like cards in the game going forward. Foreshadowing. But for now, let's talk about single strike Pokemon. The next 3 are going to be our battle styles, and battle styles were basically, they were off of the Isle of Armor and the Isle of Armor expansion DLC in the video games for Sword and Shield, and I'm going to rank each one of them separately. We'll start with Single Strike. I don't actually think that Single Strike was that good. I think it was good enough to where it doesn't deserve to be called, like, it's not good, but I don't think it's the worst, or it doesn't deserve to be lower than anything else on this list, because Single Strike was pretty decent in like retrospect. The problem is that they were just like, oh, I do big damage, that's all I do. I don't have any sort of ingenuity otherwise. I just hit big damage and hope to one-shot your opponent's VMAX or whatever. And also, they had a very clunky, their cards just didn't really have the same synergy that the other 2 battle styles had, to where like you had the Houndoom engine, and that was all cool and all that, but like they didn't really do much other than just, I do big damage, and that's about it. And we never really saw any other really, like, any decks that really use Single Strike other than Single Strike Urshifu. We had, like, decks that played Duraludon VMAX, but that was, like, used separately because Duraludon was kind of just its own thing. It was a wall, and because of that, I just feel like Single Strike was just, it missed the mark because it was just too basic. And there's not really much more you can do with just hit big damage than what they did, but for what it was good, but not good enough compared to some of these other things on this list. I think that Rapid Strike was just fine. Actually, I'm going to put Rapid Strike probably above Ultra Beast GX. Rapid Strike was really fun because they introduced multiple different ways to use Rapid Strike. Rapid Strike was very overpowered because it had sniping attacks with like Rapid Strike Urshifu, but it also had some other cool ideas like Rapid Strike Malamar, which allowed you to shuffle as many Rapid Strike cards as you wanted from your hand back into your deck, which was really cool because then you could like recycle them over and over again. And Malamar was a very cheap way to play, like cheap deck to play in general, cost-wise, and just kind of easy to play. And then you also had like Rapid Strike Jumpluff, which could just hit multiple times in a turn. You could attack twice, which I did a video on it a very long time ago, and it was one of my favorite like custom ideas that I've worked with before. And I just really liked the idea of how they implemented Rapid Strike into the game, and it just felt a lot more fluid. I mean, again, no pun intended, Rapid Strike was advertised as kind of like water, just fluid motions that eventually will do a lot of damage to multiple Pokemon or multiple times, things like that. But Rapid Strike just felt a lot more cohesive and felt a lot more structured than Single Strike, because it also had a really good engine with like Octillery. You had like Karina's Focus. Rapid Strike Energy was way better than Single Strike Energy in retrospect because it just did more at that time and it had more uses. And I just think that Rapid Strike was better just better in general. There were some not great, there were some like not very balanced things with Rapid Strike, but it was pretty good. Fusion Strike, I'm gonna put Fusion Strike in not good. Not because I want to, but because I know everyone else wants to. You know what? Nope, I'm putting Fusion Strike in just fine. And this is my hot take, only because I played Mew VMAX. I know, you can boo me. Go, just let it all out. Hey, just start typing the comment, boo, and then delete it, please, because that would hurt my feelings. But I liked Fusion Strike, only because I played Mew VMAX, and it's just, I liked playing Mew VMAX because I had a personal experience of opening a Fusion Strike booster box. I've explained this story a couple times, and you can actually watch the video when I opened up that booster box. I made 2 of them. I never finished that trilogy. It was supposed to be a trilogy, but I just have a personal experience with Fusion Strike, and I think it was the best of the 3 when it came to synergy, because it just had the most going for it. Of course, you had Mew VMAX, which copied any Fusion Strike Pokemon on your bench. You had Genesect V, which had the most broken ability ever, and it had a great attack. You had Meloetta, which could donk anything. I actually Meloetta donked toward Reklev one time, which I thought was really funny. I did that on the first turn, and I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize until later. I was like, oh, well, I just beat the best player in the entire game. That was really cool. So just in my personal experience, in my personal opinion, I like Fusion Strike, a lot. I would say probably even more than Megas, but just in general, I feel like Fusion Strike was a well-designed, for trying to make it synergy-wise and what they were going for with the, just on paper, the gimmick itself of working together was done very well. Now, in actual gameplay, it was terribly unbalanced. In fact, a lot of you would probably put it in not good or the worst because of that. Because it was so broken because of Mew VMAX. Mew VMAX single-handedly ruined a lot of the format and caused a lot of problems to the point where Pokemon themselves actually made 5 direct counters to try and stop Mew, and even still it won the World Championships. A video on that is getting worked on right now. And I just feel like, but for me personally, I thought that Fusion Strike was just fine. Now, I've noticed that we actually have, not very many very goods, but I promise we will get some very goods coming up here. Oh, we're going up. We want to go down. There we go. This wheel on my mouse is not very great. Okay, next up we have V-Union. Now, V-Union were just fine, but I'm going to put them in very good. Because V-Unions were incredibly powerful. Like, if you look even at, like, Pikachu V-Union, on a single, or not on a single V-Union, they were 4 cards, but on those 4 cards, you could do, you could charge itself up, you could do 200 damage, I think it was, no, 250 damage, which was really overpowered for that time, and you could also do, like, 150 damage item lock. Yeah, you had 200, sorry, it was, I think, 150 damage item lock, which is really good. You had, yeah, 200 damage flip a coin for paralyzed, which was also pretty good. And then you had one for 250 damage. And if you look at, like, Mewtwo V-Union, which was the most popular one, you could infinitely stall with Mewtwo V-Union. Your opponent basically had to, like, one-shot it, or it was never going to die. It had, you could spread damage counters everywhere. It did a ton of damage. And I just feel like it was a very well-designed, a very well-designed gimmick. And, it was just well-balanced, because you had to get all 4 V-Unions in your discard pile, you had to put it on your bench, and then you had to charge it up, which you could use Union Gain, but in that format specifically, when it was used, or, like, when they introduced it, it was very difficult to do that. And because of that, you had to use, like, Arceus Vstar in order to power it up, to power almost any of them up. And because of that, it was just, or you had to use, like, other engines in order to charge them up. And because of that, they were pretty well balanced. They never really saw competitive play because they were 3 prizers, but they were really cool. They got to use all 4 cards for the art, and I just like their designs. Just from every standpoint, I think they were just very good, in my opinion, and, I want to give V-Union some love, because I know that Pokemon really didn't give them love. I think we're only, like, 4 or 5 V-Unions, and that just makes me really sad, because there was so much potential for them, and then they kind of just dropped the ball as soon as they came out with V-Stars. So we'll get to V-Stars in a minute. Alright, Radiant Pokemon. Radiants were a very mixed bag, so I'm going to put them actually in not good. I'm not going to even put them in front of Single Strike, because I think that Radiants, competitively, Radiants were some of the most broken cards that we've ever seen in the trading card game. In fact, Radiant Greninja is in contention for one of the most broken cards that the trading card game has ever seen. It's because it was reliable draw engine, and it was a great attacker. But also, we had Radiant Charizard, which was, like, either a very cheap 250 or a 3 retreat cost problem that will sit in your active spot on the first few turns of the game while you're trying to set up, and it caused you a lot of problems. Thanks, Radiant Charizard, for being a liability all these times that I've tried to play Charizard EX. Anyways, looking past that, Radiants were they fell into the problem of being just a disparity. That's where a lot of these other cards have ended up, is that there was just a huge disparity in what got good cards and what didn't. And it kind of just ended up acting kind of like Shining Pokemon. Radiants are essentially just the spiritual successor to Shining Pokemon, and they just were not implemented well. In my opinion, they gave certain Radiants, like Sneasler, and Alakazam, some use later on down the line, but they gave the fan favorite ones really overpowered stats, and they just kind of were at the top forever. There was, like, just no reason to play any other Radiant, since you can only play one in your deck. There was no reason to play any other kind of Radiant, because they were just all the other ones were just bad. So I just don't really like how they designed Radiants, and the ones that did end up getting used a lot ended up just kind of being like, oh yeah, these guys are good now, you can use them. But towards the end of their lifespan, which just felt really unfortunate, and a lot of them just never saw competitive play, which is just really unfortunate, and it kind of makes me really sad. R.I.P. Radiant Charjabug, you never really got to see the light of day. Next up we have Vstar, and I actually think that Vstar was pretty good. I'm actually going to put it in very good. because V-Stars were very well balanced in my opinion. Because their Vstar powers were the spiritual successor to GX. Now, I know you're starting to see a pattern of like, oh, this is the spiritual successor to this. And that's, yeah, because there's only so many times you can do a gimmick before you start repeating it. And V-Stars were just a new take on the V evolution line. VMAXs took a step back, and V-Stars took their place. And I think that V-Stars were actually pretty well balanced because they kind of all worked. They worked well with their base V evolutions. And they kind of had good synergy to where they started focusing more on making sure that each one was at least playable in some sense. Whether it was for their V-Star, essentially just their V-Star power, or just their attack. And some of them, like Regidrago, had to wait a long time before they were viable. But it was because of that combination of raw strength and also a powerful V-Star power or utility power, they ended up being very versatile and very unique in different ways. And making V-Star powers abilities, or having a chance to be an ability as well, was also just really powerful. Like Arceus V-Star and Regidrago V-Star are going to be like the staples that people look at in the future as kind of like the two that stick out the most, but they were honestly done well in my opinion, because they went back to being two prizers as well, and they just felt like what VMAXs should have been as an evolution to Pokemon V. And I just really liked that in the trading card game, just because they felt way better than what VMAXs were. And maybe that's just because I'm so jaded from VMAXs and 3-prize Pokemon to where I just was very grateful for V-Stars, and I'm still grateful for them. Also, just I have a custom V-Star token that I've been using forever now, and one side is like kind of my channel mascots of like Swampert and Pikachu, and the other side is Mega Mind as Pikachu going no V-Star. So I'm really gonna miss V-Stars when they rotate out, but I think they were implemented well. Alright, next up we have regular Pokemon EX. A return to regular EX, I'm actually gonna put them in very good. I think that regular EX, at first I was really scared when they announced that EX was returning, because the ones that we originally got were very underwhelming. Well, most of them were. Now looking at some of them, even from Scarlet and Violet base, you still have like Miraidon and Gardevoir, which are very powerful. And I think that they were implemented well into the game because they helped slow the game down a tiny bit, kind of reverting things back to the 2-prize race, which felt way better than the 3-prize race from before, which wasn't really much of a race. If you just went first, then you kind of won the game. But EX has kind of added a more dynamic feel to the game again, while not making them underpowered. Of course, you have some stinkers, like you had Koraidon EX, which never really took off, and you have some big beat-sick ones nowadays, but I feel like they were a good way to reintroduce powerful Pokemon into the game. Making some of them evolutions was really smart, like Stage 2s or Stage 1s, kind of implemented a reason to use smaller single-prize Pokemon again as pre-evolutions, and gave them some sort of use again, rather than just being able to evolve directly from a 2-prize V, which could hold on its own. You were instead relying on a more fragile strategy with the evolution EXs that felt in balance with their evolutions, felt worth it to go against the beatstick basic EXs that also existed at the same time. Now, there have been some not great EXs that I wish that they would have never printed in the first place, like Iron Hands, or Raging Bolt is also really annoying, but there are certain ones that also just made me feel like this was a good way to reintroduce things in the way that they did, and I think Miraidon is a good example of that. So, we've had some good EXs and we've had some bad EXs, but I think their ultimate goal of trying to slow the game down was at first really good. Next up we have Ancient and Future. I'm actually going to put Ancient probably in just fine. Honestly, I'm actually going to put Ancient in very good. See, now we're starting to get some very goods. I think that Ancient was actually very well implemented into the game, because when they were introduced in the Oh, I'm blanking. And Paradox Rift and Temporal Forces, they did a good job on making sure that Ancients were what they were supposed to be. Big, dumb cards that just do big, dumb damage. Or big, dumb effects. And they did a good job on that. And I'm not saying that if you play an Ancient card, or an Ancient deck, that you're just dumb. But they're basically just showing the simplistic nature of what an Ancient card would, or what an Ancient Pokemon or an Ancient artifact would be like. It's simple. It's not going to be very much more than just straightforward. And I think that's a better way to say that. Ancient cards all have synergy, very good synergy with each other. As like Earthen Vessel allows you to get energy in your hand while discarding potentially other energies, so you can use Sadas to put them into play. You can use like Brute Bonnet to poison your opponent's active Pokemon, but you can also attach an Ancient Booster Energy Capsule to make sure you're not actually poisoned. It takes away your that poison, gives it more HP, and then you can use these really strong Ancient Pokemon in a beat stick way, because it's all simple. It all just kind of has this nice synergy with each other. And then you have like Single Prize Roaring Moon. That just everything meshes together in a way that feels like a very, very solid way to implement this sort of strategy into the trading card game. And I don't think that the same can be said for Future. Future is basically kind of an amalgamation of random things. And part of that could actually just be symbolism, for the future is not going to be very linear. The future is made up of all different ideas from all different people, and nothing will really make as much sense. And so I think that Future is going to go lower on onto Just Fine, probably below Rapid Strike, but before V. I'd even put it above or below GX, because I think that Future has had some good design to it, but its only real gimmick has been that they boost each other up. Like if you look at like the Future box deck, which is not as good as the Ancient box deck, you'll see that it's not necessarily as cohesive, and it could, if it's intentionally supposed to be all different, then I think they did a great job on it. But in competitive play, you really just see Future cards as more of like tech cards in specific decks. You see Iron Bundle in a lot of decks now. You see a lot of Professor Turo Scenario. And these are just like generically good cards for anyone that just have a Future label on them. But they do have enough synergy with each other, and they have a pretty okay deck. I'm probably looking more solid post-row. I don't know exactly if that's the case. But they have a decent amount of synergy with each other, but they just feel a little underwhelming compared to Ancient, and it's just kind of a shame that both of them were implemented at the same time. Next up we have Tera EX, and I'm actually just going to put that at the bottom of not good. I'm not going to put them in the worst, because that's like supposed to be the worst, like why does this exist? But I'm going to put Tera EX at the bottom, because they are terrible. They're not good, because Tera EX was just basically give the same Pokemon like Charizard or just like these fan favorites a fresh paint of coat, slap it on, and send them out. Their gimmick being their original gimmick being, oh, you can't hit them while they're on the bench, is really stupid, because not a lot of decks could hit multiple Pokemon on the bench anyways anymore, and plus a lot of it wouldn't even do much. And nowadays it doesn't really even matter, because Dragapult EX can still hit them with damage counters and ignore the Tera rule altogether. Now when we got Stellar Tera, it opened up the field to make it a little more interesting with the introduction of like needing multiple different energy types, which is like Amazing Rare Pokemon, which I'm just realizing that isn't on the list. And I honestly would put probably Amazing Rare in just fine or not good, purely because Rainbow Lugia like abused the heck out of them. So my apologies that they're not visually going to be on this list, but that's where I'd put them, probably like towards the top of not good, because they were kind of cool. But anyways, Stellar Tera was basically supposed to be what Tera should have been in the first place, and it still feels flat. Like, there was a really good video made by my friend Sandyavar about if stellar Pokemon were well implemented in the trading card game, and the answer is no, not really. They didn't really do a good job on it, and it just feels really underwhelming. And honestly, I'm putting it lower than Team Magma and Team Aqua Pokemon because they at least tried to make them better. Any of these other ones, they at least tried their best. Not their best, probably not, but they tried harder to make them something memorable. Whereas I'm sure that, like, even still, in games, people forget that the Tera rule exists because it's so forgettable. And I'm sure when we look later on down the line, we'll think of Stellar EX or Tera EX and be like, oh yeah, that exists. I don't even remember what that gimmick was. And that's just really disappointing because in the video games, Stellar, using Tera is basically a meta-defining way, or a meta-changing way, to make any Pokemon have a chance against a bad matchup, because it changes their type. But it's not really well implemented, because it just turns a Pokemon, into a different type, and hopefully that will just, it'll have the same synergy. Like, Charizard can kind of work on its own. Dragapult can cheat its way into play, stuff like that, where it can like just cheat one of those energies, different energies with the sparkling crystal, blah blah blah. What I'm trying to say is that the different type thing falls flat because it doesn't have a lot of synergy with the original type that the rest of the deck should be focused around, or its energy at all. And Stellar Tera doesn't really work because it just is not a good. It is too expensive for no reason, and it just is an underwhelming payoff. And if they're just a regular typing, a straightforward typing like Teal Mask Ogerpon, they're just kind of like regular EXs that are just Tera because they have to be, and that just doesn't feel great to me, in my opinion. So yeah, I mean, that's my rant on Stellar Tera. Just Tera in general. Not a very good design. Alright, next up we have Trainers Pokemon, and I'm actually going to give Trainers Pokemon the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to put Trainers Pokemon probably right behind Rapid Strike. I actually don't think that Trainers Pokemon are great, but I don't think they're bad. And this is I'm working on this video before we get Journey together, so I could be completely wrong about this, and they could be either really good or really bad, but I think they're just kind of mid. Like, they have good synergy with each other, and I can be grateful for that, but also at the same time, there's not exactly, like, it doesn't feel as competitively useful as other gimmicks in the past. They just kind of feel like underwhelming in certain aspects, or that they just need to rely on other strategies in order to work, which is honestly okay in my opinion. I think that just they feel a little underwhelming just based on our current power creep and the way that the game is currently playing right now, but I'm sure they'll be really good once we get rotation, and once the game's supposed to slow down, they'll kind of be keeping it more at like an electric pace, kind of have good synergy with not only the other trainer Pokemon and the other like pre-existing Pokemon in the format. So I think honestly we might actually have a pretty good time with Trainers Pokemon, but it kind of stinks that they're not going to last a super long time, and that they'll kind of phase out eventually after we get our Team Rocket expansion. I don't actually remember what it's called because it was like literally announced in English the other day, but I'm gonna put Team Rocket's Pokemon probably in very good, because I've seen some of the releases for these cards from Toyn Lay on Twitter, and oh my gosh, Team Rocket Pokemon are basically the spiritual successor to Team Plasma, Team Magma, and Team Aqua. Like, basically all of them. And holy Arceus, are they crazy good. Only certain ones, obviously. I don't exactly remember everything about them, but they just have the same, they have like a vibe to them, so where they feel very good going forward, and I really do like that. I really like how, they have a lot of synergy with each other, and they feel like they'll actually be competitively viable, and I'm just really excited to see how that turns out. So, I think because of that, Team Rocket will go in very good for now. I could be really wrong. They could miss the mark, but that's my speculation, is that they'll just be very good, and that Team Rocket will actually be a pretty decent and pretty fun archetype in the future. And finally, we have Mega EX. I know it's just a gold EX here, but it's Mega EX, I promise. I'm putting this in the worst. And In fact, I think it's going to be worse than VMAX. And that's because it evolves from, like, regular Pokemon. It basically takes everything that made the OG Mega right here and made it bad. For no reason. They butchered it completely. They made it a 3-prize, made them 3 prizers. They made them evolve from regular Pokemon for some reason, crazy reason, and they made them really overpowered. But it doesn't really matter when there's decks like Goldengo and Roaring Moon and Qianpao that all exist in the same format where you can just one-shot it, and in a format where 3-prize Pokemon can also be susceptible to things like Dusknoir Sweep on the same turn. You can actually just take all your prizes in one turn with like a Dusknoir Briar play or something crazy like that. But I just don't think that we don't need 3 prizers back in the game, and it just feels like it kind of insulting in general, just as the Mega design to come back. It just feels like a cheap way to get people to buy them again because they just have the Mega name on them. Also, the fact that they don't have the really cool Mega symbol on them and instead just have the word Mega in the name itself just feels really lame, and I'm not a fan of it. Just mainly it's the 3-prize Pokemon thing that we've seen with VMAX and GX that I never wanted to see again. It's just back again, and I'm not excited for it. But yeah, that is my tier list on ranking every single gimmick. Of course, again, I missed amazing rares, which I'd put in not good, probably, or just fine. But yeah, that's my list. The trading card game has had a ton of really interesting gimmicks over time, and I'm really excited to see how these next few gimmicks turn out. I really hope that they kind of learn from the past, and it seems like they're doing a lot better on it. As you can see, there's a lot more modern stuff that's up here compared to things that are down here, which is like a lot of older stuff. Kinda. Some of it's not. I don't know. But I think that there's always room for improvement. There's always room for creative growth. And I think that Creatures is doing a pretty decent job doing what they've been doing. They'll have their stinkers, they'll have their bad cards all the time, but at least their gimmicks are, at least most of them are pretty high up here. There are more good gimmicks compared to not as good or bad gimmicks, and I can appreciate that. And I think that's really where I'm going to leave off this video, is that we've had a lot of gimmicks in the trading card game, especially in the past 15 years, but they've done a good job, and I think that they'll continue to do a pretty okay job and learn from their mistakes, hopefully. And I'm just excited to see where the Pokemon trading card game goes from here, because we've had so many cool things in the past, and I'm just excited to see what they do in the future and how they learn from what they've done in the past. So that's my tier list. That's my rant on every single gimmick in the Pokemon trading card game since Black and White. I really hope you guys enjoyed. I am working on some longer form content, like some, not longer form, more like just higher edited stuff. That is going to take a little bit because college has really been ramping up for me. I literally, once I'm done with this, I'm going back to work on college stuff. It's currently the weekend when I'm making this, and I'm just working on a ton of homework. So it is a little disappointing, but I will try and get it done as quickly as I can, while also balancing college and also my other stuff going on. But thank you guys for being patient. I made this kind of as a way to keep the content going on my channel, and plus I just had some free time, so I thought this would be a good time to do this. And I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you all so much for watching. If you guys want to support me more, please consider subscribing. It really does help my channel. Consider liking the video and leaving a comment on what you think about this ranking system. And yeah, that's all for me. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, God bless, have fun. We'll see you out there, and we'll see you next time. Thank you all so much for watching.